There we go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fun-filled episode of Fangirlz Assemble. I am joined by Maddie, who I haven't seen a month so far. How are you doing?
Sorry. I'm doing great. Sorry, I've been not in the country for a long time.
Well, no, you were in the country, then I was gone somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're also very excited because we have a special guest with us, Jeremy Whitley. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
We're doing excellent as well. Now, those of you who are joining us, Jeremy is the writer of Unstoppable Wasp from Marvel and also the creator of Princeless from Action Lab. Maddie's over
Yeah,
there.
sorry. Holding them up. I'm super excited.
Yeah, she's super excited to talk about. We're both super excited to talk about both of these comics and some more with you. But before we get started, Maddie, all the books that you just hold up, where did you get them?
InStockTrades.com,
Tell
which is
us
my
more
favorite
about
place.
InStockTrades.com.
Well, let me tell you. So you can get all of your books up to 42% off. That's DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, all the whole shebang. And if you spend at least $50, you get free shipping in the US. That's my spiel.
So, and they do excellent customer service, and so all
Absolutely.
the books that we're going to be talking about, you can get them all at InStockTrades.com. So now with our patriotic duty towards InStock Trades out of the way, let's start. Let's welcome Jeremy to our show. So thank you so much for joining us. We've been planning on this since C2E2, and that's in March. But then because of our schedule and everything, it has been quite some time, but we're so glad that finally you're here.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah, it's been a pretty chaotic couple of months, comics and life-wise. So glad to finally be able to sit down with you guys.
Right. So
well, thank you.
Yeah. So to get us started, I guess we ask this of everyone. Tell us about your origin story. What's your superheroic origin story in the world of comic books?
So I started reading comic books when I was just a little kid. I think I lived in California at the time, and we used to have a comic book shop just down the road from us in Livermore, California, called Fact Fiction Fantasy, which my dad, who was a big comic book fan, used to take us to, my brother and I, and we started out picking up the Marvel trading cards and games and stuff like that, and eventually moved up to reading the comics ourselves. So I've been reading ever since then, and that was the same store that I went to my first signing at. Some guy named Stan Lee came and did a signing at the store at that point for when the Marvel 2099 line launched. So it was an interesting thing because I actually I brought in a story that I had written about the X-Men for my elementary school class.
Beautiful.
So I have the only copy of an X-Men story that I wrote signed by Stan Lee.
Oh my God. So did you get to publish that story so far, or?
No, I think my marker stick figures probably wouldn't go over as well in the direct market as they did with my teacher.
Oh yeah, you never know. I would like to see those. I would absolutely love to read those. So so that's your reading, starting in the comic book. But when did you started kind of doing it more professionally?
So for a long time, when my family moved to North Carolina, there was no real comic shop around us where I went to high school, and I kind of fell out of comics for a while. And after I went back to went to school at UNC here in I live in Durham, but it's in Chapel Hill, and I used to work at a Blockbuster down the street from the campus, and there was a local comic book shop there. Ultimate Comics, which is still my local shop. That kind of got me hooked back in. Actually, I think the first new comic I bought at that point was for my wife. It was when they started doing the Dark Horse Buffy the Vampire Slayer series. Yeah, she'd been a huge fan of both Buffy and Angel. So one of my regular customers worked at the comic book shop and was like, "Oh yeah, you should check that out." And from there, it turned out that that guy Joss Whedon was also writing a book about the X-Men. So I started reading that, and they sucked me right back in. At some point in the couple of years after I started doing that, I figured out that like writing comics without being able to draw was actually something you could do. And I started, working with a friend of mine who was an illustrator to do, some self-published comics, some of which have seen the light of day, some of which have never actually gotten out there. But, one of those ended up being Princeless, which, is just saw a couple different incarnations before it actually got out to the whole world. But that's where that started and where I got started.
So over here, we're a very huge Princeless fan, especially Maddie, who has been binging on Princeless all of today and I think yesterday. Like, she cannot stop talking about it.
I started it, and then I decided, like, well, we're getting close to the interview now. I want to reread everything and go through. So it's been nice to kind of make my way back through that again and finally get through Raven and Pirate Princess, which I hadn't read because I just read through for Princeless, and now, oh man, and I should have known. This is what happened when I read Unstoppable Wasp. I was like, when you watch a movie or read a book, and after right when you finish it, you're still like in that feeling for a while. Like that's where I'm at right now with everything. I'm like, oh my god, I need more. Gotta get that hit. This is so good. Like I'm just so invested in everyone. But anyways.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've been working on Princeless for, I think it's something like 8 years now. We've got, I think volume 8 of the main series is coming out in trade next week or the week after. And then, Raven we're almost done with the 4th issue of this trade we're on right now. So that'll be coming out shortly as well. So we've got some almost 7 volumes of Raven and 8 volumes of Princeless. So a lot of it out there.
So I had a question.
Yeah.
So for Princeless and Princess with Raven, the Pirate Princess, how long do you see those stories going? I don't know if you're in your head, do you have, it's always hard to tell when you're going through a story, right? Because sometimes you think, okay, it'll only be this many volumes, but then stories go where they're going to go, right? But do you see an end in your story where you're going, or do you kind of have a feeling of like, oh, well, it looks like in my mind, maybe it'll take this many more volumes to get to my end?
So the main story that we've been doing in Princeless of her rescuing her sisters and everything was originally in my head going to be something like 6 or 7 volumes. And we're obviously past that now. That ended up being changed by first, the addition of the Raven story, which sprung out of a free comic book day story we were doing. And then the sort of continued expansion of these last couple of volumes, because, we got toward the end and we figured out that we had more story we wanted to tell. But this main story that we've been doing in Princeless is going to be 10 volumes, which I've already written through 10. And then I have a lot of other stories in that world and with those characters I want to tell, but I think it'd be much more loose, much more like an ongoing type series rather than what we've been doing now, which is sort of strictly structured into volumes. And Raven, I think, can go on forever. I mean, it's a big gay pirate soap opera. So
yeah, honestly, it's written exactly what comic book readers today want with Raven, and it's always really interesting to like. I follow you on Twitter, and I love seeing how you interact with your fans and how your fans interact with you. And I feel like with Wasp and with Raven, especially because of those LGBT themes, this is exactly what comic book readers of my age and younger are looking for. I feel like you've really hit the pulse of what a lot of the current generation's really into. I mean, same with like things like She-Ra. That's blown up, and I feel like you give it that same kind of heart to it.
Yeah, and that was my goal. Like I try to do things that I'm not I think I stress to try and tell stories that I'm not particularly comfortable telling in the first place, that I don't feel like I necessarily know how to tell, and sort of find my way into them by talking to people and listening to people and figuring out like what isn't out there that needs to be out there. And like that was certainly why I got into Princeless, is I was looking for something to share with my daughters. It had, a heroine who's a young woman of color. There was a princess story, which is, what my daughter is into, and what, my little cousins and stuff were into at that point. So like that was a big thing, getting that representation out there. And I think sort of as a result of doing that, and I think doing it right, it attracted a lot of fans that were looking for other types of representation as well. That, sort of, I think early on, a lot of people had questions about, the sexuality of Adrian's character. And it was a thing that was interesting to me, but specifically in the context of Princeless, is not something that I feel like makes a great deal of sense to address with Adrian, because it's not about her sexuality, but about needing or not needing somebody to, rescue you to be your hero, and being your own hero. So like, I felt like that question was sort of beside the point. But like, it was something I was interested in addressing, and I could obviously tell that people were looking for it. And so when we got a chance to do the free comic book day story for Action Lab that one year, I was like, I want to do something that fits in with the rest of Princeless, but people don't have to have read everything that's come out to this point to understand it. So it'd be fun to introduce a new character. And I was like, well, this is a great opportunity to introduce that character that, fits in this other thing that I want to do. And, so that's sort of what Raven sprung out of. And, so I knew from that first story that Raven was gay, even though it's not really like part of those 12 pages that got into the free comic book day story. And I thought it was incredibly interesting to me when, like, the 4 issues volume of Princeless that we did that has her in it came out, watching like the response that queer fans of the series had to it as compared to straight readers who had no idea that Raven was gay or that there was anything going on there, and that like people who were looking for it like immediately knew what was going on with her.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And she's just very obviously coded that way, even though like it's never explicitly expressed in that story. And then, with Raven's ongoing series, it was important to me that it be explicit basically from the first page of that story. Like, is that, Raven is into girls. That is a big part of that story from the beginning. And the question isn't like, oh, is she interested in Kimena, her, friend from childhood, but like, will they or won't they? Is that something that's going to happen?
So we kind of get hear a lot of things like people talk about, like, every time we can come up with diverse characters, like, when I say diverse, I mean queer characters. We hear this sort of argument saying that, well, why do we need gay characters? Why can't it be just good story? Like that kind of people that are out there.
Yeah, as if those two things are exclusive from one another.
Right. So how do you address that? Like, how do you address that? I want to tell a story about about a character who happens to be gay, and that's just the story, versus like this idea that somehow these two things needs to be separate. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting where people draw lines like that. And I think it says a lot more about the people drawing those lines than it does about the media itself. That like, those same people are very excited when it's like, oh, I think a lot of people relate to Spider-Man because he's, nerdy and often poor and has bad luck. And it's like, nobody's like, well, why do we need a story about a nerdy high school kid? But they are like, excited about seeing somebody who's like them, but then when that character is like somebody else, when it's about Kamala Khan, who is, very much in that character mold of Peter Parker, like they're like, oh, well, why does she have to be Muslim? Why does she have to be this, that, and the other? It's like, well, that character is to somebody else what Peter Parker is to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You spoke the magic words for you.
Like, you're just saying Fariha words. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to me that everybody is sort of able to see that sort of representation in themselves, and that also doesn't have to be the entire story. Like, I think that's part of why Ms. Marvel rings so authentic, is that it's not just a story about like, oh, what would it be like to be Muslim and a superhero? It's like, no, she is Muslim, she is a superhero, she is all these other things. Like, that's part of her character, and it's a very like important part of her character, but like the story isn't that,
Right. And and you can have both, I guess. Like, it just, is it me who's making that noise?
There's a little bit of an echo, and I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah, who is making that? Hang on.
It might be me, I don't know.
Is
It's
it okay now?
So we have all sorts of technical issues sometimes. It's life.
I mean, we're very professional, Jeremy. Trust us, believe us, we are. So, no, I mean, yeah, that's just something that we hear so often, and it's just very annoying to actually constantly hear that. Like, every time someone is a diverse character, it's like, oh, do we need that? Yeah, we need that. I mean, you don't, but someone else does, and that's okay. Just shut up.
Which I love in your books too, because I really feel like, and I mean, I'm curious too, and I know we'll probably get to where we can talk about it now, your process when writing characters too, because you have to write. There's so many diverse characters in here from diverse backgrounds, races, sexuality, what have you, and that can be hard to write when it's not something you are,
Yeah.
And I'd be in the same boat. And I wonder what your process is when you said you listen a lot. Do you talk about these characters a lot with other people? Do you kind of have these conversations like, okay, how should I write this character? Like, what is this experience like for them?
Yeah, I mean, Raven was sort of my test case for this in a lot of ways, because a lot of the beginning of Princeless, that was sort of cooked up with me and my wife, and I always felt comfortable sort of bouncing questions about that character off my wife, but like with Raven, it's like, all right, this is an expanded group of characters who are less like me and less like my wife, and I want to make sure that I am actually representing these people who I'm aspiring to represent in this story. So I've formed what I've occasionally termed my cabal of queer women.
I love that.
Yeah, that I would just like, especially when I had important like romantic story beats and stuff like that I could take to people and be like, hey, I know you're a fan of this character and in this story, would you read this and make sure it reads as authentic and I'm not like missing anything? Because I think that's the big problem that a lot of writers have, is like they assume that their best of intentions is enough, and that they're not going to accidentally stumble into an issue that they don't know about, or that they don't realize is a problem. I think we saw a lot of that around the when people started reacting with the queer characters deserve better kind of stuff, like because there were a lot of writers that were having very sort of similar problems with killing off their queer characters and all the tragic relationships that were going on around that point. And they were like, all of them were like, oh no, we really wanted to have good representation and we really care, but like they weren't actually talking to anybody about what they were doing. And they were totally missing the points of some of the important things. So I started doing that with Raven, and it's something I've continued to do when I'm not sure, or when I bump into a new area of things that I don't have firsthand experience with, and something I did almost to exhaustion with Unstoppable Wasp, especially in this current volume, because dealing with mental health stuff, it was something that was very important to me to get the depiction of bipolar disorder in there correct and relatable to, you know, people who have dealt with that, and that it was also sort of clinically correct, like that I, you know, talk to folks who do actually deal with, you know, treating and diagnosing things like bipolar disorder, so that I can make sure that I wasn't doing the wrong thing and screwing it up without meaning to.
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue to the question that I wanted to ask. Like, how did the idea of like Nadia having this bipolar disorder came to be? Like, was it always kind of in your mind when you first started writing her back in 2017, or this was more of like a recent development?
It was something that I was thinking about and talking to my editor, Alana, about during the first volume as well, because, you know, I did a lot of research into not just Nadia, but also Hank, who was her father, in, you know, writing that first volume. And, you know, one of the things that is pretty well established about Hank is that he does have mental health issues, and they had established that it was at least self-diagnosed as bipolar disorder in, you know, Avengers AI a few years ago. And so in doing research to that, it came up that bipolar disorder is often something that's passed on genetically, that you're much more likely to have it if your parents have it. So it was an interesting possibility to me, not just to, you know, have that as part of Nadia's character, but to have the ability to tell a story about mental illness that I hope kind of strongly contrasts against some of the early stories that were told about Hank, where like his mental illness makes him evil, and, you know, that he has various personalities that are problematic to say the least. But, you know, I think it's sort of matched with comic book writers' understanding of mental health in the 60s and the 70s.
Right.
You know, it gave us a chance to tell, I think, a 21st century story about mental illness and about a teenager dealing with mental illness, which is uncommon in comics, I feel like.
Right. I mean, the thing is, like, oh my God, where is that coming from? Sorry about that. Like, no, I mean, Hank is a very unfortunate character, I feel like, in the Marvel universe, especially being one of the founding member of Avengers. He really gets the short end of the stick and never have been able to live down that incident with Janet, which I have to say, like, I wrote it down in the question, like, I have to talk to you about that. Like, the way you have dealt with that, especially the first, like, issue 7 and 8 in the previous run, I was, like, you know, pretty much in a fetal position and crying after reading that. Like, that was just so exquisitely done.
Thank you.
And the thing is, like, it made me like see Hank in a different way, actually. Like, it's not that, you know, it's one of those situations like that he's never going to live that down. It's a certain tragedy, but the thing is, the way Janet has, like, you know, was talking about it, that people are complex, and then how Nadia was dealing with it. It was just so well done. I don't have a question. I just wanted to tell you that. Like, you know, I don't have a question about this.
Thank you. I think it was an interesting opportunity for me, because something like I wanted to do more stuff with Janet, because in the first sort of 6 issues of Unstoppable Wasp, that first volume, she's barely present. And some of that was, you know, by design, because Janet is a big character and a big personality, and Nadia was brand new, and I didn't want to like make this end up being Janet's book when it's supposed to be Nadia's. But, you know, I wanted to, it dawned on me while writing it that that it's discussed in every story about Hank, but Janet almost never talks about it. Like, it's almost never something that she addresses, especially outside of talking to Hank. So like the idea of having somebody who is, you know, the victim of domestic violence, like, discuss it rather than it sort of being discussed around them, was like, that seemed like a no-brainer to me, even though there was very little precedent for it in, you know, stories about Janet. So like, I wanted to make sure to do that. And it also, it ended up interestingly giving me a chance to sort of like, once we got around to doing the story about Nadia and her mental health, and in her story in the second volume, she also hits people, like she also hurts people, and like what is the difference between what she does and what Hank does, and why do we forgive Nadia and we don't forgive Hank? And I think it's that Nadia does something heroic and that she seeks help, and Hank doesn't. Like Hank continues to try and believe that he knows best and to do it on his own. And I think that is something superheroes excel at, but is not something that is good when it comes to dealing with mental health issues.
Right. Do you also think that it was because the product of the time, because Hank is of a different generation versus Nadia is of a 21st century, where seeking help for mental issues is more encouraged?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a tough thing with Hank, and it's definitely something that a lot of people have tried to figure out how to deal with, to I think varying degrees of success in writing Hank. But
and no one succeeded, I can tell you, other than you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I hope at some point to get to be able to actually write some stuff with Hank. But he's still dealing with some robot related issues at the moment. So maybe another time.
Yeah, poor guy. Anyway, well, back to Nadia. So the thing is that, was it always a plan to kind of ground her story into STEM related? Because, she's very science focused, moving it, getting all the ladies, recruiting all the ladies to make this girl. This is in research. Genius is in action research.
Yes, Genius in Action Research Lab.
So was it always a plan to kind of ground her story into STEM?
Yeah, absolutely. That was something I saw as sort of a big opportunity when Marvel approached me about doing the book. Their sort of question was, what would you do with it? What kind of story would you want to tell? And I think it's changed a bit just in the last couple of years while this has been coming out. But I feel like there's been sort of different ages of comics in which, in the early years of comics, having characters who were science heroes was sort of in vogue, and a lot of those characters have survived in Reed Richards and Hank Pym and Bruce Banner. But that was also a time when all of the female characters were either non-existent, non-powered, or their origins had very little to do with any sort of professional pursuit. There aren't very many female science heroes out there, and I thought Nadia was an interesting opportunity to not only do something with that, but to introduce more characters that fit in that vein. In the rest of the girl gang, which I thought was cool, and I think the further we got into it, the more we sort of figured out how much of a role science would play in the book. Because we ended up doing the letters columns after that, and then it wasn't until the first issue was drawn and colored that the idea of doing the Nadia's Neat Science Facts actually popped up. It was one of those things that you go back and look at that first issue. There's the big full page thing of Monica's robot. Which has all these like cutaways where you can see the joints and things in the robot. And that wasn't in my script originally, that there were cutaways, but it's a thing that I also decided to do. And it was so interesting to me as an idea of like, oh, this is how Nadia is seeing it, because Nadia knows robotics. Nadia is a scientist. So obviously she knows what this looks like on the inside. And that's what we're seeing is Nadia's perspective. And so like I went back in and did those first science facts. And I was like, oh, I really like this idea. I'm going to sort of thread this through, the rest of the story and make it an ongoing thing. So it all sort of popped up a little bit at a time. So, having her there, having that stuff happen, and then having Mockingbird show up in the first issue, because I wanted somebody who was who is one of the few female scientists who's continued to exist in the Marvel universe.
Right. And also I want to say that you made Jarvis cool as well, which is a hard act to do.
No
I needed
feat.
to mention that. Yeah, I mean, Jarvis, he tries to be Alfred. It's like, honey, no. But this Jarvis, I could get behind. I was like, oh, great. And speaking of science fact, one of the science fact I also learned from Unstoppable Wasp that the trimethylxanthine, the caffeine, it was one of those coincidence thing that someone at work was like, oh, you didn't have enough trimethylxanthine today. I'm like, yeah, I didn't have my coffee today. And they were taken aback. They thought that, they're going to gut me, if you know what I mean. Is that attitude? But I'm like, nope, Unstoppable Wasp saved me. Nadia to the rescue. So yeah, those science facts are really cool. And then also on top of that, where did the idea of having all the different ladies in STEM doing the interview, where did that idea came from?
That was something that sort of bounced back and forth between Elsa and I during that first volume, in that we talked about doing something. I wanted to do something where we profiled women in science, and she had talked about doing a Tumblr for the book where we talked about historical scientists and talked about Marie Curie and stuff like that. And I was like, well, that's cool. I like that idea, but I think part of what we wanted to accomplish with the book is having young people see being in science as an achievable thing. And if you're only talking about women who have historically made history in science, it's a very small and repeated pool. But if you start talking about actual women who are scientists right now who are doing interesting and amazing things, then you get an opportunity to give the readers exposure to those people and give those people exposure that they deserve, and to do all sorts of interesting stuff with that. And I've also met several incredibly cool people through doing those interviews. So I feel like that was all around a win-win. And now I have actual science consultants that I can go ask about things.
That is really cool.
So cool.
And also the colorist for the first volume, Megan Wilson, she herself is a mechanical engineer.
Yeah, she does engineering, and it was a weird thing that I didn't know when we started the series, and then it sort of came up at one point that she couldn't make this convention because she was off, doing this engineering thing, and I was like, wait a minute, she's doing what now? She hasn't told me any of this. I feel like this is relevant to my interests and our work together. But yeah, it's at the point I figured that out, it was obvious to me that we needed to interview Megan at some point in the story too.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell as a engineering professional how difficult it is to have this as a hobby. My hats off to her. that is incredible. And we're not also very art-centric people, so she's exceptional. I can tell you.
Yeah, it's an incredible combination of things to do. I'm right. Always impressed when people who are professional scientists or engineers or doing anything in STEM fields are also somehow inclined with be it acting or writing or art in any way. Because Tamara Robertson, who I interviewed in a couple of these, was also on Mythbusters, and also does a bunch of stuff for the Science Channel and stuff on TV, and she's really awesome, and is also an incredibly gifted scientist and engineer. So.
Yeah, we get it. You're an artist.
I'm not an engineer, so.
No, I'm just kidding. So shall we switch gear back to Princeless?
Well, so I have sort of a, I guess, non-writer related question, but more of something we talk about in the show. Let me just do my little spiel before we get to the question. Something we talk about in the show a lot is how we can best use our money, I guess, to support creators. And it's something we talk about a lot. And actually, we talked about a lot in relation to Unstoppable Wasp. It's come up a lot in our show because we personally don't buy single issues. And so I think a lot of people, younger women especially, are not buying single issues. I think they tend to buy collected editions. And sometimes that can create situations where our favorite shows get canceled. Or books get canceled, right? And so I remember when I first heard that Unstoppable Wasp would not be continuing, and luckily it was. I'm not sure entirely if that was due to collected edition sales or what have you, but I was just curious about what are some of the obstacles you run into with your series, because you have two different kind of realms, right? Because you've got Unstoppable Wasp, and then you've also got Princeless and Raven. I know that there have been some issues in the past getting those to be funded enough to continue. So what are some of your challenges with that? And then what are some of your recommendations to us as your fans to make sure that we're doing what we need to be doing to help your series continue? Because I want them to.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question because I think like Marvel especially, but you know, all the major comic book companies base a lot of how they plan for things, how they sell things on how single issues do, especially in the direct market. And you know, I think the people who tend to order through those systems in a lot of cases are older, in a lot of cases they're male, and in a lot of cases are white.
Yes.
Because I think comics for a long time did a very good job of chasing away everybody else. And, you know, there are still plenty of comic shops that are not hospitable to, I guess, non-traditional comics readers. And it's tough because I wouldn't encourage anybody to like go shop somewhere they're uncomfortable, where you know they don't feel like they're being served. But you know, I do encourage people to find comic shops and then you know see what they have available, because there are lots of great comic shops out there. There are lots of comic shops that are owned and run by women who have you know women's groups and stuff like that. I know. You know, Phantom Comics in DC is a great example where they have a lot of like reading groups where people can, you know, they'll have like a queer book club and a women's book club and stuff like that every month at the shop, and they do a really good job of including everybody. But I know like not all shops are like that. So I think the biggest thing people can do is, you know, obviously it helps to buy single issues. And I think that's the biggest thing that some companies see. But in the case of Wasp, the you know the second volume is a result of trade sales. Like, you know the collections of the first volume of Wasp sold so well that they brought it back, despite having felt like they needed to cancel it in the first place because of you know single issue sales. So it's not like those sales are invisible. They just take comic companies a little longer to figure out.
Right.
And I think in the case of, you know, books like Princeless and Raven especially, we've been at it long enough to know that like those books do great business in trades and do well in digital. They're not probably ever going to sell well in single issues. And I think, you know, you're seeing a lot more of us and other companies that make books like that, aiming more towards graphic novel type format or doing, you know, digital releases for the single issues and then collections for, you know, physical versions of it. And I think supporting those, talking those up, reviewing those on you know, be it an actual review platform or Amazon or Goodreads or whatever, and continuing to, you know, spread the word about that, the kind of books that they love that we make is the biggest and the best thing that can be done, especially if you're talking about supporting creators, because it's like, I love writing Wasp and ultimately I'd love for them to let me keep writing Wasp forever. But like, ultimately I also don't own that. So like, I don't get to choose what to do with it. And if they want me to do it, they'll ask me to do it. But, you know, Princeless, I'm going to continue to do that and to sell it, and those dollars actually go to me when or some percentage of those dollars actually go to me when you buy that. So I think, supporting creator-owned stuff and making sure that people give that the same sort of pop that they do to, Marvel and DC stuff is important as well.
Right. But, after the trade goes on sale, we're gonna get this back again next year. Because it seems like that's the trend has been.
And it's good to know that your thoughts kind of reiterate what we were. Well, I mean, we don't have any hard facts. It's eventually I'll figure out a good way that we can quantify all of these, all of our hearsay, our opinions on it, because it does seem like the demographic for your books and for a lot of books that I'm interested in, that Free and I are interested in, tend to be, tend to be that they, young women and younger people are buying collected editions, and then those series are the ones that tend to be the ones that get canceled, which makes us all very sad and very upset. But luckily, we're all very vocal about it, and I think that does help. And we do commit to buying those collected editions when they come out, and I think that also helps too. But hopefully, eventually, maybe some of the industries will consider how to market based on the intended demographic.
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see some of the change. I mean, there've been series at Marvel that have lasted longer than they might have otherwise because of trade sales, and you certainly see like DC definitely seems to be doing more to try and reach a younger audience with their Ink and Zoom books. I know at least one of which is on the actual bestsellers list now. And those, I think that may be something we see more and more companies moving toward. I think Marvel and DC especially are dedicated to trying to keep the direct market going and healthy. And I certainly don't root against local comic book shops, but I think they're not always where everybody needs them to be, and they don't always stock the stuff that the newer customers are looking for.
Right. I mean, if you also go we'll do that too. So just let us know.
Absolutely.
So what are you currently reading that you can recommend to people that you are really liking?
So I'm behind on a lot of current books. I've been because right now I'm writing Future Foundation. I've been reading a lot of not old Fantastic Four stuff, but Fantastic Four stuff from the past several years. I've read all of Jonathan Hickman's run on both Fantastic Four and Future Foundation, both of which were great. I'd already read all of Fraction's stuff, but I went back and read all that again, which is also great. I've gone back and read a bunch of old Power Pack stuff from Louise Simonson, who's one of my favorite writers. And that's definitely worth reading, as well as I read a lot of Avengers Academy because it has Julie Power in it, who's a big part of the Future Foundation series I'm doing right now. And that I absolutely recommend to anybody who hasn't read it. It's very good. I've also been doing I got wistful for the Young Avengers recently and decided to do a big Young Avengers reread. So I've read both volumes of Young Avengers, The Children's Crusade, Young Avengers Presents, all the various crossover Young Avengers issues, which are of differing quality depending on the particular crossover. But then also I just finished reading all of Al Ewing's New Avengers series, which had Billy and Teddy in it. And that one I hadn't read before because I was so busy working on other stuff at that time, and that's fantastic. I absolutely recommend that to people.
Yeah, I doing stuff. It's really, really good. So what's your top 5 run of all time? Top 5 comics of all time?
That's tough. I think one of the series that got me into writing comics and that I still adore is Why the Last Man. Just a great Vertigo series from probably about 10 to 15 years ago now. It's very good. If people enjoy Saga, which is also, Brian K. Vaughan, they should definitely go back and check that out. I'm looking right now on my stack of other Young Avengers stuff that I'm going to reread at Matt Fraction and David Aja's Hawkeye, which is just some damn fine comics. Like, it was one of those things. As I was rereading all the Young Avengers stuff, I got to the Young Avengers Presents Hawkeye issue, which is the first like Hawkeye story that Fraction wrote, and it's like immediately that first issue, he's already got both the voice of Clint and Kate and what they're going to be in Hawkeye, and it's just so good. And I was like, man, he just walked in the door and knew what he was going to do with those characters. It's just that good. That's really fantastic. I'm trying to think beyond those two, what really stands out to me. I'm a big fan of both Matt and Kelly Sue's stuff. Pretty much everything they've done, I've liked. And of course, we already talked about Ms. Marvel, but I think G. Willow Wilson's entire run on Ms. Marvel was just amazing. And Saladin is doing great now. But I think, I think Willow's stuff is really, it's its own thing. So I don't think there's any way to outdo her at what she does. I realize I'm making a lot of stuff.
So self-contained, a perfectly contained superhero story. Other than that,
yeah, I think it's so rare that books have the amount of like runway that series got to sort of build up new characters and sort of do it from scratch the way she did. It's really impressive and it's really good. And now it's finished, so people can like sit down and read it all in one big chunk.
That's what I cried. But so, and what advice would you give to new upcoming creators that are coming in to the industry?
I think the biggest thing that I tell a lot of people is I wasted a lot of time trying to be a writer or thinking about being a writer and wanting to be a writer and being an aspiring writer, none of which are actually writing. And I think that at some point, if you're going to be a writer or you're going to be an artist, you have to start actually doing it. And there's no substitute for putting in the work, even if you feel like you're doing work. A lot of times, thinking about doing something feels like doing something, but it's not. And at some point, you just have to jump in and do it. I think that's the biggest thing. And then other than that, it's listening, because I think comics especially, there's a ton of people in comics that are happy to answer questions you have or talk about what's part of doing comics. I think people have a lot of opinions, and they tend to let their opinions get in the way of actually like listening to other people and where they've been and what they've experienced in comics.
So I have a question. Oh, sorry, it was bad. Can you guys understand me?
I can understand it. It's fine for me.
Okay. So now that your children are getting older, are you able to get into comics with them at all? Are they just like, oh God, Dad writes comics, we are so not into that? Or they're like, okay, yeah, let's read some stuff together, because they're getting old enough now, sort of, to read even like the youngest level, right? Like, are you starting to kind of get them in there?
The older of my two daughters is 8, and she basically just reads stuff by herself now. She's got a ton of graphic novels and comics of her own. She has been really into Unbeatable Squirrel Girl ever since it started. We started off reading that together, and eventually it just became like her book that she gets when my pull comes in. But that one's great. She loves all the like Raina Telgemeier books. I think Smile is the first book that like we read together, and she immediately was like, "Can we read this again?" Like, she just wanted to start over from the beginning as soon as we were done. And I mean, that's incredible. And she still reads a ton of them. I've started on a couple of occasions reading some of my Little Pony stuff with my 2-year-old. She's still sort of getting into it. But as to like Dad doing it and is it cool, I think we've finally gotten to the point that like, hold on, my wife is signing things at me. You can't hear? Oh, my daughter loves El Defo. She was trying to tell me that my daughter loves El Defo. That's one of her favorite comics by C.C. Bell, which is really good if you guys haven't read it. It's very good. It's somewhat autobiographical. It's about her struggling with being deaf and hard of hearing, and it's she is a tiny rabbit girl in the story, but it's still very much her story, and it's a very good book, and I think very good at sort of teaching kids about differences and things that other people deal with. But yeah, I think she's just now gotten to the point that she realizes that what I do might be cool, that like other parents don't write comic books, and that other kids might think it's neat. Because I came and actually talked about comics to her class earlier this year because they were making comics of their own, and she was very excited that all of her friends thought I was cool. So
nice.
Yeah, I remember very distinctly when I started writing My Little Pony stuff. I told her that I was writing My Little Pony, and she said, "I am too." And I was like, "Cool, no, you do that. You're doing great. You write more My Little Pony stuff."
Story.
She could write her own little My Little Pony story, then bring it to you to get signed, like you did with your X-Men story and Stanley.
Right.
Like, so do you guys now have a competition? Who writes better, My Little Pony story?
I don't know. I'm probably not too far behind me. She's writing a lot of little comics in class about her family, but I'm in all of those, so I don't feel like I can like really judge whose story is better.
So what's coming up for you? The Power Pack is coming, and Unstoppable Wasp, the issue 10, the final issue.
Yeah.
This week. What else?
Unstoppable Wasp wraps up this week. I think Volume 8 of Princeless, I think, is coming out in trade this week. And then the Fantastic Four story with the first Future Foundation story that I wrote will be out next week. I think it's coming out right after Comic-Con. It'll be out, and it's going to have the first. I think it's like a 10-page story that we worked on that actually sort of sets up the Future Foundation series, which will be starting in earnest in August. And that's going to be a lot of fun. We've already done some previews of it. I get to show off a few new pages at San Diego on the panel I'm on, which I guess is the other big thing I'm doing on the This Week in Marvel panel at San Diego, where I'll be talking about both Future Foundation and the one-page story that I'm doing for Marvel Comics 1000, which is also very exciting, but I'm sworn to secrecy on.
Okay.
But you just told me.
Well, it's common knowledge that I've done it, that I've written it, and Irene Coe has drawn it, but nobody knows anything else about it yet.
So any other things?
Well, we got more Raven Pirate Princess coming. We actually just finished off. I think we're got the cover for this next issue, so that should be out probably in the next sometime next week on Comixology, and then we've got more coming along quickly behind that. We still don't know whether we're doing more Rainbow Bride or not, but they're the trade collection that just came out. Yeah, so everybody should go buy the collection of that, because apparently the collection is already done very well through like Barnes & Noble and Amazon and such. So it's definitely making time to think about wanting to do more, which I'd love to do more of that series. And also done more Sea of Thieves comics for Titan that are coming out. I don't really know what the schedule on that is, because I think they're releasing them somehow through the game itself first. But I guess people should keep an eye out for that.
Nice.
And any upcoming con appearances?
Well, I will be at San Diego. Obviously, I've got a couple of panels there. I have the Marvel one, which I believe is on Saturday, and then I have a panel for. I have a couple of other panels there, if I could remember what they were. But I'll be busy there, and then I think I'm doing Soda City Comic Con in August, which is in Charleston, South Carolina. And then I'll be at SPX in Bethesda, Maryland in September. And then I'm doing New York Comic Con, where I will actually be tabling this year so people can find me in October. And then my last one for the year is Bull City Comic Con here in Durham, North Carolina, and that's in November.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll be in New York Comic Con, so I'll definitely see you there.
Awesome.
Yeah, so, and by then I'm pretty sure like some of Future Foundation will be out, so we get to talk about. Yeah.
We'll be a few issues in by then.
Right. So Maddie, do you have any final remarks for Jeremy?
No, we're getting close to time, so I just want to say, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for continuing to write fantastic characters, because honestly, everything you've put out, I mean, for me, it's just like, okay, well, how is he going to top it again? Because these characters speak so much to me, and I think they do to so many people, and I just really, you're doing good. Keep it up. You have not put out a single thing that I've been like, ooh, that was a weird choice, Jeremy. And I think for a lot of writers, even the best writers, there's series that come out, and I'm like, you were doing really well. What's this? And for everything you put out, I'm like, man, you know how to write these types of characters. Like you just, I mean all characters, and continue to do what you're doing. And thank you for coming to talk to us about it.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like a challenge now. I've got to find some way to screw something up. So
no, please don't do that to me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I've got a couple of things coming up, which hopefully will be announced by we might be able to talk about them by New York Comic Con. But a couple of new creator-owned things that I'm excited about getting out there. So.
We're looking forward to it so much. And to kind of add to what Maddie said. Thank you for giving us Nadia Van Dyne. Really making her a character that is something that will be long-lasting in Marvel Universe. So, and especially introducing all the STEM-related ideas, or a lady scientist, not a bunch of lady scientists in Marvel Universe. Thank you for giving us all of that. And
I hope so. I know Nadia will be around. My hope is that we can manage to keep the rest of the girls around. Somewhere in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you'll be back. I'm telling you. The second trade will be out in September. They will re-announce that you're back in December. It'll happen.
All right, I'll look for it.
Thank you so much for joining us, taking time out of your busy schedule. And all the books that we talked about by Jeremy, you can find that in instocktrades.com, where Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and Image Comics are up to 42% off, while I think Action Lab Comics is 20% off, I believe.
Sounds reasonable.
But shipping over $50 and more, and within the United States. So go to instructrades.com for all your collected editions needs.
And we'll see you all next week. We should be back on regular schedule, and hopefully all three of us ladies will be back together again.
Hopefully, after a month of like 2 of us in pairs, all 3 of us will be back.
Yeah.
So see you then. Thank you for joining us once again, Jeremy. Have a good night.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Good night.
Good night.